All right, thank you guys for your patience. We are going to dig into polling language, and so Ryan, welcome back, and thanks Brenna. And thank you everyone for your patience on. I wanted to just kind of, no pun intended, but poll the room. Ryan went through and presented it to all of us in our smaller groups. In the instance of time and our ability to have dialogue, I just want to check in and see, like, Ryan's here to answer questions. He's here to talk about the polling. I mean, he just heard kind of 4 scenarios from Brenna. We're going to ignore the no. But, you know, the 75 million, the 60 million, and then the combined, kind of the 3 areas we're thinking about. And so, Ryan, I just wanted to lean in there. I'm going to start with, is there a question from the polling for anyone on the board? I don't think we have to necessarily revisit everything, but I would welcome, like, just our opportunity to talk with Ryan. We left it pretty open-ended with him as to concerns, questions.
Oh, hi Ryan. Thanks for being here.
Hi, good to be with you all.
Hey, I have a question I want to ask you. From the 2 polls that we've done now, do you have a sense about, we're looking at the combined total, 73 plus 60 now, about response or impact or difference, whether that's all in one, like a 5.1 and a 0.2, or 2 separate initiatives with a 5A and a 5B?
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, in the polling, we tested them together. And generally, I think it is better to have one question if there's, you know, a real desire to get both passed. I think what happens when you have 2 measures is, yeah, you can try all you want to run a campaign, say yes on 5A, 5B. But unfortunately, the dynamic that happens a lot of times is that folks end up choosing one at the expense of the other. And typically we see that with school districts when there's an MLO and a bond. Having 2 separate MLOs is a little bit of uncharted territory. It's not something that folks do very often. And so the polling doesn't necessarily give us an answer to that. Like, hey, what if we broke these out? Except to say that I still think, even though it would be the larger amount, I still think the general mill would probably be more popular because of the purposes of that are, in terms of salaries and CTE, we found in the polling are just generally more popular than the capital work that needs to be done. And I think a lot of that is just because folks have a hard time, like they're not in the buildings, you really have to educate them a lot. You know, if everyone could just see the presentation that Jeff just gave, like it'd be a different story. Everyone would kind of understand it, but they don't, right? And so I think setting it up that way, the general purpose mill would definitely have a better chance of passing. But I think it would be difficult to pass both, just because generally, like, we're seeing just some economic pessimism and folks aren't feeling great, and so to ask them to vote yes on one question and follow it up and vote yes on another question is just a little bit more of a tricky ask than including them all in one and trying to see if the general purpose mill and the purposes of that will kind of carry the day with the other kind of combined with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
Which say where Jeff's presentation of showing us like the case studies, and maybe we can add more case studies, not so much for us, but for the public. I think that's
The study session.
yeah. Sorry, so the study session, yeah. Just sometime between August and November.
Brian, my biggest concern, and I'm sorry, does anybody else have questions or?
I have one question.
Please.
I was thinking about some of the other ballot measures that are being proposed. Have we considered like the graduated income tax and the Tabor proposals and how those might impact our ask?
Sure, yeah, I mean, I guess what I would say is it certainly doesn't help. A couple months back, we actually did a statewide survey, here at Magellan, just kind of on our own dime to try to understand the interplay between the statewide ballot measure or measures and any local ask that our clients might have. Generally, like the dynamic that you hope doesn't materialize is folks say, oh, I'll just vote for this because it doesn't appear that it will affect me, and this will solve everything, right? Like this will be the silver bullet that will, fix, everything that's wrong with the world. I don't know if it's going to necessarily be sold that way or how folks are going to learn or be educated about the graduated income tax. But just logistically, kind of psychologically, to try to get ahead of someone who's voting, they are going to see that question before they see any local school district ballot measures. And so, it goes to other purposes as well, right? Like it's not just schools, but schools are certainly a part of it. It doesn't help, but I don't think it necessarily, dooms any local ask either. Honestly, what I'm slightly more concerned about in terms of other ballot measures is just competing Jeffco ballot measures that may, be on the ballot, whether it's for municipalities or fire protection districts or what have you. Those typically may have a little bit more of an impact because it's all local, it's all related to, their local tax increases, whereas the state, a lot of people look at the state questions as kind of separate, and honestly, how at least some folks view it is, there's no guarantee, like I have a hard time drawing a direct line between this statewide question and how it's gonna help a local school district, and so a lot of people just sometimes assume like, oh, it's only gonna help other people, it's not really gonna help us. So honestly, like that's a helpful dynamic if people don't actually believe that it's going to solve any issues for Jeffco specifically. But all that to say is we don't really know. It's kind of to be determined. I'm very curious how the campaign kind of shapes up and how folks are learning about the graduated income tax and how it's sold. It's interesting, it's a factor, but I'm not sure exactly how much of a factor it'll be.
Thank you.
Just trying to wade through the depression.
I have one more.
Okay.
Speaking of other asks, do you have an idea of what other local Jeffco asks will be on the ballot? Remember? These were all our.
Yeah, so I can speak just a little bit about at least some of our clients that we've done polling for. City of Lakewood is possible. Wheat Ridge is possible. Arvada Fire Protection District is going, and that's a decent sized chunk. West Metro is going. West Metro Fire. I don't believe the county is going with the heating. I could be wrong, but I don't believe so. So those are the ones top of mind for me.
One of my big things, and Craig popped back on camera, so we might pull him here into this conversation. One of my biggest concerns is the nothing scenario is really bad. And I understand that the 75 pulls better, but we really need, Matt is always reminding me, trust, transparency, accountability, write it down every time. Telling the people what we need and asking for what we need, but also not, I'm really worried the 60 million will pull down to 75 million if it's all in one. And so, that's the thing that keeps swirling in my mind and makes me really nervous. Craig and I've talked a lot about this also. Craig has secured some funding to do a very small poll to test it as 2 versus 1. So he's doing that actively now, working on it now, and Craig can hop in, but Craig, when do you think that one will be wrapped up?
I think if we get green light, we can get it done by Saturday, a week from tomorrow.
So like a week, so that's really helpful for me, because I hear everybody wants the combined, but it scares the shit out of me, to be really honest, because I worry that we won't get anything if we do that, even though we need both. So I'm trying to, in my brain, you figure out from the polling, from the data, what is most advantageous to voters, and then the ballot language, which is our very next discussion, is then how do we write it in such a way so that it all ties together, right? I agree, if everyone in Jefferson County could see the presentation we just got, it'd be real different. So, I don't know if that was a
And I
question.
think, remember back to the first survey, I went back and looked this back up. Ryan hopefully asked a question of, if you could fund both or one, what would you choose? And they said 45% said both student programming, staff compensation, and capital. 29% said staff compensation only. 2% said only district capital, and 24% said none of the above. So to me, and I think Ryan briefly mentioned this, I think it's important, like the teacher comp measure has a much higher chance of passing than the capital construction. And I've talked to each of you about this. The capital construction is kind of new to voters. We haven't spent 3 years building the case. I think we can improve the ballot language there a little bit and make that a little bit more attractive, but that's the one that will have a much more difficult time passing, even though the teacher comp one is 75 million. I think that, in the first poll came back at 64, and the second poll added another 7%. So I think there's a real sense on the teacher comp one that one has a much better chance of passing, even if it's bigger than the 60 million. I'm very worried about the capital construction as a standalone. I just don't know that the voters are ready for that. There's a needs case that has to be built, and we've got 3 months to build it, and we can do that. But that's where I'm, if one passes and not the other, I'm like beyond convinced it would be the 75 million and not the 60.
Right, yeah, I agree with all of that. And, remember too, in this latest survey, like we did find that only asking the 75 million does get us 7-8 points. We don't have data on the capital by itself, but I agree with Craig. I think if you were to split them up, I think what I should say is it doesn't hurt the chances, obviously, like I just said, of the general mill passing. That it helps those chances. But if there is a desire at all to try to get that special purpose mill, separating it out by itself actually is, and the poll that Craig's in the field next week will tell us this for sure, but I anticipate it, like we're less likely to get that than if we were to combine it, because then it's just like, all right, we're gonna give this a go, it's gonna be combined, and we're gonna hope that the general mill carries the day. That's obviously a huge risk. If you were to split them out but still put both on the ballot, I think it would be almost kind of setting that capital up to come up short. Obviously, we don't know that for sure. But like you said, you can run the campaign, vote yes on 5A and 5B, like these are a package deal. You can do that as much as possible. But I'm with Craig. I would be shocked if in that scenario the capital ask garnered more support than the general purpose bill. I don't see how that would possible.
So, just to package that all up, if we run them separate, what I'm hearing is we don't think that's gonna hurt the chances of passing the 75, the chances of passing the 60, special use is very low. But then how do we compare that to is running a single question in terms of our chances there? Because I've gone through these poll results many times, and I think Michelle's fears are very well placed and well informed. I think we run a single question, we lose.
Yeah, so basically the way I look at it is combined. It's a total coin flip. I think that's kind of the phrasing that we have used before, and I still think it's true. Breaking them up moves the general purpose mill higher, like out of coin flip territory, not a slam dunk. But to me, I think it probably moves the capital question below coin flip territory, to be quite honest. So
If you split them. But I think coin flip's even optimistic. The main thing I'm seeing here that I find most troubling is when we have the uninformed ballot measure test, we've got 54% indefinitely or probably approve. And then when we go to the informed ballot measure test, we lose 5 points. So
yeah, and and, you know, we talked about this a little bit, but I think what's going on there is we did assume, you know, all things equal, negative versus positive messaging. And I think that's like it's a very conservative estimate to do that. Like I'm not sure that that's actually gonna be the state of play for the next, you know, 4 months, 3.5 months, whatever. So we did hit them with the best negative messaging. I don't think necessarily we can assume that everyone's gonna hear the best negative messaging in quite the same way that they did in the poll.
I mean, I think that's a good question, you know, is questioning whether or not that assumption is valid, and yet at the same time, having done political work in the past professionally, and as somebody who's in the business of persuading people still, these arguments, and I want to say, I think this is a really good poll, so I'm not, this isn't a critique of the poll, but these are low-hanging fruit negative arguments in my view. I don't think that I don't think it is unreasonable for us to assume these would be the no arguments, and, you know, in terms of how well they presented and who would present them, I think that's, to me, that's the bigger question of who would actually be making this case, and that I don't have an answer to, but I don't think these are exactly, I think, the arguments we come up against, and all of these arguments against have pretty strong, I mean, they all show, you know, that they're persuasive at you know, 60% or above. I mean, that's a hard.
Yeah, no, you're right. Like when I said, you know, I'm not sure we can assume, I think we can definitely assume that these would be the no messages. But we're making an assumption that may not turn out to be accurate, is that they will be just as well organized, just as well resourced as a side pushing the pro argument. That's where I really, to your point, like we don't know who's going to be making it, we don't know, you know, what kind of resources they're going to have. That's the big question. But yeah, no, totally, you're right. Like these are the no messages, and yes, you know, some folks will try to bring stuff, you know, completely out of left field, but to the extent that we hear no messages, they're going to be the ones that we're including.
I guess one other question, and this, one of the things I had seen, Ryan, is that this went out on like, a couple people posted the link to the poll on social media.
Sure.
When you guys went through and did the data, I assume you scrubbed for like reflections of what our electorate is and any, that didn't sway the poll at all, did it?
No, yeah, no, and that's a good question. It's why every link that we send has a unique link. And so there were a couple instances where it's like, oh yeah, 10 different people put the poll at this link, but we only count the first one.
Okay.
And so yes, people are able to spread the link, but it doesn't mean that any additional responses that were shared on social media actually get included in the poll response.
Thank you. I thought so, I just wanted to double check.
Yep.
Do we have thoughts on what an organized opposition, who an organized opposition might be? And also what are, I guess this is probably more a question for Craig, it's like what does our campaign look like in terms of, you know, because I'm trying to assess like, okay, we have questions as to if or who an organized opposition might be, but also what are we prepared to do in the first place? Because I mean, we're kind of starting, we're not starting at zero here. Like we're already starting behind based off these numbers as I see them. So what's our plan to win look like, and then who do we think we could feasibly be fighting against?
Yeah, I think in my view, it seems to me that the opposition is a little bit muddled, and I think again, in the same way that we're worried about Prop NN or the graduate tax impacting us, that's where the Advanced Colorado College funding will likely go, not to this. And so I think in the same general sense of what we saw in the Jeffco kind of table revision message or campaign of 2024, we will get some opposition, but it is not likely to be well-resourced. And so I think it could be somewhat organized. There's a group of folks that you all know that can be very involved in school activities and tend to be on the no side of these things, and they're pretty good at getting some press and to have a small crew of folks, but I don't see a world where they're significantly funded. I think our effort will be better funded than the no effort. I'm quite confident of that. I couldn't tell you a number we will end up at, but we'll have a decent campaign. I feel good about our support from JCA, for example. I do think actually NN will be an advantage to us there because they'll be out walking and campaigning, and we'll get double hits on the doors and more activity. But I think we'll have a better ground game and a more well-funded campaign. And I don't see a lot of call it middle ground opposition to this. You know, kind of a large group of chambers of commerce or eco-devo groups saying no, it's too much taxes, we're against it. I think the general Jeffco influential community is in a yes position here, whether it's to the 135, the 75. I think they can go back and forth, but I have not encountered significant folks other than what I call the normal suspects that are in the no position. So I think we will have a pretty significant advantage in funding, in campaign activity, in endorsements than the other side. But that's also what it takes to pass a tax increase, right? It's harder to get to yes than to no, but I feel pretty good about where we stand vis-a-vis the opposition.
And I'll just add, after working on Jeffco 1A in 2024, like Craig said, there was Lindsay Rasmussen, by the way, I work with Craig at Hilltop. Good to see you all in person. And yeah, I mean, there, like Craig said, there was a small, you know, it was an organized effort. It was mostly just press and social media though. Not a ton of money, no, you know, I guess you could say professionals kind of leading the campaign. And I would guess it would be that same group of people, because they oppose basically every tax measure in Jeffco.
Okay. Would it be helpful to move into ballot language that kind of parrots that is what we're thinking about, or do you wanna, what are you thinking? Dr. Stein, you wanna add anything here?
Well, I'll say it now since you called on me, but as we move to ballot language, and having heard Jeff's presentation and having talked to Brenna, and I'm putting thoughts in Craig's mind, but I'm sure he's gonna wanna influence us to craft out language that will be appealing to voters. I think what Jeff and Brenna would say is, in addition to that, we wanna craft language that is most aligned with our greatest needs, and that we not make commitments that might go outside of what we intend to prioritize in the future, in part because of that trust and accountability. We wanna make sure that those three things are all aligned. And so that would be, you know, maybe just my hope as a newcomer to this process, that we not disrespect past work done in crafting language, but you know, craft it in a way that's gonna achieve those goals.
Ryan, do you mind hanging on while we look at language? I think there could be questions that come back to the board, okay?
Of course.
I know, and Kim, I know you're on, so welcome.
I'm on.
Hi, Kim. Does everybody know who Kim is? No? Okay, Kim, will you introduce yourself?
Sure.
You'll do better than I
My
will.
name is Kim Crawford. My name is Kim Crawford. I'm with Butler Snow in Denver. I'm a bond attorney. We work with lots of school districts and other entities with public financing advice, which includes at some points elections. I've been before the board a couple of times before, but I guess most recently at the last meeting where we discussed ballot questions. And I did want to point out one thing really quick in particular with what Ryan was saying is these are not two mill levy override questions. They are different statutes, and the capital statute, what you're calling the capital construction levy is not a mill levy override. It's outside of that mill levy override. So that's why they're two different questions, because they're two different statutes. But you can put them together under Tabor. You can combine ballot questions so long as you're not combining with debt. But I just wanted to clarify that they are two different things, and one of them is not a mill levy override. So thank you.
No, welcome. Thank you for your help. So what y'all have in front of you, which you all, sorry, it comes out every so often, is some draft ballot language. And Kristen, help me here. This is, Craig has looked at this, Lindsay and Kim?
Yes, so this is the latest version that was last reviewed by Kim either last night or this morning.
Okay. Kim has made edits and Craig has made edits along the lines of what Dr. Stein was saying of like, how do we make it appealing to voters, understandable to voters? What the partnership gave us was a wonderful start, but, and we did tell them that as polling comes in and we lean into our experts, it could change, and we would wanna go back, I think, to the partnership, just let them know, like, I wouldn't wanna surprise them that we've changed it drastically, but I think, even to Jeff's point about like, the water is a unique thing, so the way they put clean drinking water in there, so you'll see it's a little bit different, and Craig, the way this is set up is as an A and a B. However, one of the discussions we have is not a vote, but an alignment on how is everybody feeling as to 1, 2, 75 or 60, that's kind of where we want to get to, so would everybody like to take just a minute and maybe read A? And then we can chat about that, is that fair? Okay. I'm not an educator, but I'm gonna look to see what's next.
That's great.
Is that right? Hey, Brenna,
Yes, ma'am.
one of the questions that Tina just brought up for a future time, but want to put it in your head and in Dr. Stein's head now, is the demo or the presentation you gave us earlier, could we add a slide that says what happens if NN and 195 also pass? To Aaron's point of like understanding how, I think there's two sides of that story. There's like the, hey, it passed, yay, it's something, but it's not nearly enough to cover. And here's where that money would go if it was passed, because that might be something our public is curious about.
And also reviewing like the update we got last week from outage.
Can you talk louder, Super?
So Brenna, I was reviewing the, update we just received, last week from Mr. Bowditch about what it all might kind of look like, but I would love to sort of understand it in a different way with some graphics and specifically within our context here at Jeffco and what our finances look like.
Sure, I'm happy to do some digging and see what I can find about what it means for Jeffco specifically insofar as there's clarity. I will mention that in the spring it was extremely difficult to make any estimates given the lack of clarity in how funds are going to be spent, but hopefully that's improved. The one thing I do want to add though, because I have to, it's my job, is the forecast you were shown, while it does exclude potential new revenue, it is still an optimistic forecast. And the realities of enrollment and actual costs are such that if I'm going to show an upside scenario, I would add a downside scenario that is realistic, that has expenses growing by at least 1 to 2% with no change in what we're doing. So I'll do both.
All right, sounds great, thank you. All right, so this first issue, 5A, thoughts, comments, concerns, questions? still in there. And I know, I think I've had conversations with some that have said that might be a little wordy and not needed. Do we think that language is helpful? Maybe that's a Ryan and Craig and Lindsay question, like, is that
I
gonna,
kind of
is that
like
gonna
it,
sway?
you know, we did pass two different ways to talk about teacher pay, and I think raising it, you know, noting that we are behind similar school districts is helpful, so I think closer to market average is helpful. I don't know if it's a weird thing for support staff, school leaders, other market average, if that's a problem, but I think from the voter's perspective, it's probably a good thing to include.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. It certainly doesn't hurt, and it just gives some sense of, you know, we're not trying to, you know, be dramatically higher than everyone. It's just that we want to be average, and it reinforces the point that we're not currently at market average, right?
Yeah.
So I think it is helpful generally to have it in there than to not have.
And my only other question, before we get into the highlighted area that I believe came added, is, Brenda, I don't see a notice of like, that moves with inflation. Did I miss that, or are we like leaving it, is it assumed if it's not in there?
We don't need to separately note that.
Okay.
The language here allows us to max it out as a percentage of total program. Total program moves with both
Okay.
inflation and enrollment.
That was
And so this becomes, what I used to call the expanding wedge. It's also unfortunately a contracting wedge
Right.
in our stack of mill levy overrides. But it always ensures that we're collecting the maximum amount. So in a lovely future state where we aren't declining and, the whole package of mill levy overrides will always be maxed out, so.
perfect, thank you.
I have a question. But it's in the second paragraph below the highlighting. Can I jump into that?
Are you in 5B or are you still in 5A?
5A.
Yep, perfect.
Okay. So given the presentation that we received today and how, Brenna highlighted that there's an opportunity when, if this passes, for the funds to get to the reserve funds, do we need to spell that out? Because right now it says deposited in the general fund and used for educational purposes as provided herein, et cetera, et cetera. Do we need to spell that one-time caveat out or not?
From a technical perspective, and Kim please weigh in, we would be depositing funds into the general fund and they would be used towards general purposes. But Kim, go ahead.
Yeah, it says it's provided herein and as previously approved by the district's voters, pursuant to 2254-1085, which is just your general fund. We could say as for purposes provided by state law, that would be more flexible. I mean, that would just provide, I guess, maybe more clarity that this is just whatever is authorized by state law. But I think your other questions still authorize this one and the other questions. But I think that might be a good idea, just as provided by state law, maybe instead of herein.
What do you guys think?
Are you asking that because, wanting to use some of the general purpose to potentially support capital expenditures?
Right, well, we wanna yeah.
So I'm asking it because in Brenda's presentation, she identified that we are, the budget that we passed for the coming school year, pre-spent some of this money. Yes. And so there's this sort of once in a 10-year opportunity to replenish some of the funds that we are allocating from the reserves, fund into this. The last thing I want is for folks to say, hey, you said that you were gonna put it towards this, but now you're putting it towards that. I don't know if that makes sense.
One other bit of context that might help here. In 2018, when Jeffco passed their new mill levy override, which at that point was the largest new override the district had passed, they did not attempt to spend the money in the first year it was collected. So it was not expected in that, scenario. And furthermore, I did poll, informally, not like these guys, some of my other districts, and it is common practice, for districts in the first year of collections. When you've adopted a budget that assumes you're not gonna collect it, because that's the appropriate and prudent thing to do, if you don't attempt to spend it mid-year, it can be perceived as somewhat, I don't know what to say, but it can be perceived pretty negatively to push that money out the door mid-year when people are accustomed to a budget cycle where they have input on the budget and the budget follows a process. And so, while I hear what you're saying, I actually, wonder, if voters actually appreciate, that in that first year of collections, you're now trying to spend it on something that wasn't in the budget, that wasn't previously identified, that wasn't planned for. Instead, you're replenishing the reserves that were previously spent on compensation increases and then moving forward in a thoughtful fashion, negotiating compensation as we always do in the spring and then putting it in there. So that's just my thought.
Thank you, that context is very helpful.
Got all kinds of ideas rolling around right now, so.
What is the,
One change I would suggest for both those ballot measures, because of the hits against potential, I did want to add in something like, the funds will be tracked on a public website, where all dollars spent can be tracked by the public, or something like that. Again, I think this accountability, transparency piece is really important, and I think both in ballot language and implementation is something the voters are gonna wanna see, so the more we can include that in the actual language, and of course, follow through on it, I think will be extremely helpful.
so Craig, let me read you what Kim added, I think last night, this morning. The spending of such taxes will be reviewed by the mill levy override committee for transparency and accountability and summarized in an annually released public report. And we could say, and provided on a public facing website, maybe?
Correct, for a and public and posted on a public website for full transparency and tracking. Just more reinforcement, we're not hiding the ball, we're being very public here. I really think that's the hit that hurts us the most, and the more people see ballot language and real teeth to transparency, the better off we will be here.
In the spirit of accountability, I'm wondering, under 5A in the first bullet where it says and staffing levels, if that might be worth discussing as a group as well. And the reason I raise this issue up is because in a district of declining enrollment and what Brenna presented in terms of maybe declining revenue as well, there's gonna be a need to right-size staffing levels, and will be measured against our ability to follow through on these commitments that we make. And so my question is whether or not, the district will be able to follow through on the staffing levels specifically, if the perception is that we're gonna maintain certain staffing levels as a result of passing this measure. I don't know, Brenna, if you would wanna add any additional context from like a financial perspective, but it's a wondering I have, just given your presentation earlier.
Yeah, just rule of thumb, when we lose about 900 kids or so, school budgets go down by about 7 to 8 million. And those are direct staffing reductions. So, we are likely to lose at least 900, if not more kids every year for the next 3 to 4. So we will be reducing staff unless something miraculous happens, every year for the next 3 to 4. So it's gonna be very, very, very difficult to show raising staffing levels in any area of the organization.
And the other reason I bring that up too is because depending on what action the board takes with regards to how this is packaged, if you only go forward with say 5A, you already know that there'll be further reductions if it passes or doesn't pass.
Well, I also was thinking about that, if we're committing to raising staff levels, we're almost committing to lowering compensation capacity. So those are in direct tension. And if we're really trying to take care of our employees, I understand sometimes they're feeling like they need a bigger team to get their work done. But it feels like the real friction point I'm hearing is compensation.
So So perhaps we need to strike in staffing levels.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Strike what?
Maybe strike and staffing levels in the first bullet point of 5A. So
Okay.
high quality staff.
Yeah, I agree that if it's not true, if you're not increasing staffing levels, you don't wanna say that.
And the other benefit, just my 2 cents from the polling, is like the other benefit is those 3 words is not what's carrying, like it's the raising salary. It's not like we're missing something by removing those 3 words. That's been part of the conversation. In fact, it's actually like the conversation of declining enrollment, to Brenna's point, actually runs counter to those 3 words. So that's a good catch. I don't see any rationale or benefit to having them in there.
And to Craig's point earlier, like our intention is to have sort of a place where the public can go to see where these dollars are being spent, moving forward.
I also like that annual report that's publicly released. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. So please go ahead. This is a new topic, so.
I wanted to go back to Tina's questions. Brenna, you might not have this off the top of your head, but if we do use the additional funding and it goes into reserves, what would the new replenished total be?
So that was on that slide I presented sort of towards the end of that section. So we, instead of taking 13 million from spendable reserves of around 90, we would be adding a net of about 49 or 50. So we would be back up, sorry, we were below 90. We'd be back up slightly above that 10% threshold for spendable general fund reserves. So they'd be back up close to 140 in total, 145 in total.
And you said you would feel comfortable with it being like right at 130?
No, so again, everything moves in lockstep, right? When you add revenue, you add total, you add a need for more reserves. So anyway, point being, I'm comfortable with 10% spendable, which right now represents 105 and 135. But as our budget grows, which it will with these funds, that number is also growing.
So is it appropriate for us as a board to talk about a policy implemented that we don't go below that amount unless certain thresholds are met, so that this money is not expected to be used for ongoing expenses?
So you do have a version of that, which we did revise about 4 years ago, that relates to an executive limitation policy, and I think it's either 15 or 7, I can't remember which one.
I can look it over.
And it says, but unfortunately, it's written in terms of unassigned, and unassigned is not as helpful as of a metric, because assigning a reserve to an intended use is a management decision. And you can have many good reasons to assign a reserve. And so what's left over, what's unassigned, is not reflective of what's available to the district. So anyway, your current policy is 4% unassigned. But again, that's not a really helpful way to think about it. So if we wanted to update your policies, I'd be happy to work with Ms. Hollison on some language that could get the board closer to, what do you need in reserves that's available to the organization to spend, whether you assign it to a specific use or not. And again, that's the amount that, in general, I would try to set at 10. But you never would actually prevent yourself from spending your own reserves, right? It's complicated, Kim, let me know if you have an opinion on this, but if you have the money and you can't stop paying your bills, simply because you have a policy that says you won't dip into reserves. Does that make sense? I think if the resources are there, and you agree to an expenditure such as a salary or something else, you gotta pay it.
Yeah, I think to Tina's point, it was more of the transparency to the public. So if we had a policy in place that said transparently, we are wanting to hold this money for actual emergencies, things that might come up, then it kind of lends to that transparency where, yes, we are collecting this money and yes, it's going into this reserve fund for the first year, and we are maintaining as a board that we wanna have a higher than 4% reserve. Even if we increase it to double, 8%, even if it's not it's not what we want, which is 10%, but it's closer.
So I think this,
Yeah.
I think this is a really good discussion, and I think something that could come out of ongoing discussions with our bargaining associations around like an MOU.
You don't want to put this in
No. Hear me out.
Okay.
I do think the community is asking for some transparency.
Yeah.
And so I do think there might be a way to utilize, I think that, like, in my head, I've got 5 other ideas that could go along with that. So I do think the reason I bring up the MOU is I would almost like to be like, hey, let us figure out some policy language that supports this idea of responsible, transparent spending.
Yep.
Instead of MOU language. So I think that's a good idea, Janine, that could use its own 3-hour meeting. So if you're comfortable with it, I'd like to take that and maybe figure out a time when we can think through that. But I'm not opposed to some sort of like, here's how we plan to be protective of our reserves. Okay. Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, I was just,
No, I think it's a really, I think if we could show some of that in the next couple months through policy change, I think that would actually drive some accountability with our community. So I think it's the right alignment. We just need to be really careful because I would wanna make sure legally we weren't preventing payment of bills and all the things that.
Well, remember, those are executive limitations on staff, so what you're really saying is don't bring us a budget
Okay.
that, right? Because you can't bind the hands of future boards, it's all these conversations we've had. So, yes, we can totally make that happen.
But it could be, maybe not policy resolution, like I think there's some different levers we could pull that get to what you're saying.
but it's already in policy.
Well, there is,
Executive
the one that Brenna just described, but it's much lower than what you're talking about, the sort of threshold you're talking about. So you'd be advising, y'all 15.
And again, the budget you approved for the current year, already violates, your current executive limitation.
Yep.
So even though it's an executive limitation, it doesn't bind the board, to make a budgetary approval or decision contrary to it. So the only teeth it has is the teeth you give it.
I have another, on 5A, I just wanna bring up the word salaries, I wonder, should that be compensation, going to address benefits, rather than just keeping it as salary?
Kim, or I guess everyone, what is the thoughts on that?
I like that idea, I had that same thought.
Does that bind us to things like, well, we promise compensation with benefits or?
Yeah, I think compensation is just a larger umbrella word, salary usually fits under compensation along with benefits, so using compensation actually gives us a little bit more, latitude.
I like it.
How we address these things.
Because we can say compensation and still only raise salaries if that's what we choose.
That's what you
Do our consultants have an
I was just gonna say, that's my.
Craig or Ryan, does either of you have an opinion?
On salaries versus compensation, or Kim in the language?
I mean, compensation gives more flexibility.
Do
What
people
about
understand
appeal?
it?
Is it gonna make a difference in the thing?
Craig, do you think it makes a difference in terms of the understanding, like from the voters? Salaries versus
I don't.
compensation?
I doubt it. I don't know, Ryan, if you have experience with this, I don't think I've tested salary versus compensation.
No, I think those two words to the average voter are gonna be so interchangeable as to not really matter. And so that would suggest doing whatever makes the most sense for you all and not worrying about the clear impact, because I don't think there is one between those two.
Can we,
So I do think, you know, salaries is limiting. I think salaries is included in compensation, but I think compensation is broader. So I think that that's probably the way to go. And I also, I mean, maybe raising is correct. Do you wanna say increasing? Does that sound better polling wise or no? I mean, I think that, I don't, could go either way with that. Maybe increasing compensation?
instead of raising,
Yeah, instead of raising.
Or improving instead of increasing. Improving might just.
I think either one's fine, but,
Improving doesn't work very well, would be closer to market average.
Yeah, I don't like improving. I think raising or increasing are six of one, half dozen the other. Improving seems like you're hiding the ball or doing something strange.
yeah, I don't think improving works.
right, and we're not precluding 5A, but let's try to read 5B.
I do have just a couple, some of this goes to 5B as well. With the mill levy override committee, so I mean, in general, I think we need to just look more about guardrails and accountability mechanisms in general, with the language, and then when the thing that jumps out to me with the mill levy override committee is really then firming up our own process for how we're forming and creating that committee, because it's not very meaningful if the voters don't experience or understand that committee is actually being a legitimate kind of oversight board that's, well, right, it has, but I think we then also as a board have to consider, it's not necessarily something that goes in the ballot language, but have to really consider that of how that committee is,
Selected
how it is selected and functioning.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, because I read that and I'm like, well, that's not very meaningful in and of itself. If the community, right, if the community doesn't trust and understand the committee. And then aside from that, I think, and I don't know what it looks like right now, I think we need more language, and I think we have to be careful about establishing guardrails that comfort the voters without tying our own hands to effectively govern the district. But, our biggest problems are with trust, transparency, accountability, and I don't see really much language here that really addresses that in the actual ballot measure. And I just don't know, I don't have a solution for that, but I think that's a problem.
Would we have to spell out the committee's are you saying we would need to spell out within this ballot measure what the committee's composition would look like?
No, not necessarily in this ballot measure. So for the committee itself, I don't know that we have to do it within the ballot measure. Maybe we can do it through board policies or something, but.
You're saying implementation plan outside of the
Yeah.
ballot measure language, just making sure that we have an implementation.
And in fact, we may want to, when we arrive at ballot language we like and have a resolution to approve that, we may also want an accompanying resolution at that meeting saying, oh, and here's how this committee's gonna be.
One of the recommendations was that it was built in the GPO 7, this committee, as a formal board committee,
Right.
which certainly is that level. And that just brought up, we could talk about this at our retreat on August 21st and really put some firm guardrails around it and build it out.
Do you think the committee name should say oversight rather than override committee?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, please.
One tiny contrary vote to that, just as a reminder, you have a citizens committee that used to be called the Financial Oversight Committee. That committee spent over a year arguing that, as a citizens committee, they have no legal oversight over any aspect of the district's finances. And so the only entity with oversight is you all, and suggesting that a citizens committee does have oversight is perhaps a fiction.
I think we're overthinking it, honestly. I mean, I think the goal here is to let voters know that there will be a committee that will be overseeing. I don't think oversight conveys decision-making or authority to.
I think to Peter's point too, when I read that, if I'm not familiar with what's going on in the district, I think the mill levy override committee is comprised of staff. And so I wonder if, to go to Peter's point, if we make it even more specific, saying this is these are community members in Jeffco, these are parents and families, I don't know how to say that. But when I read it initially, my first thought is, oh, these are just staff members who are overseeing their own budget.
I mean, it could be something as simple as taxes will be reviewed by
Community
Yeah.
led,
mill levy override,
yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, or board appointed, or a citizens oversight committee, or,
Lindsay's got a suggestion.
I think citizens helps a lot there.
Yeah.
Again, it comes from the community.
Brenna said in the chat, last time it said citizens committee, it didn't name it, so we can say citizens committee.
And then that gives us the opportunity to
Formalize it.
Yeah, policy.
Can you repeat
I'm sorry to prolong this, I always,
Brenna said last time Jeffco said a citizens committee, but didn't name it. So it would read something like, spending of such taxes will be reviewed by a citizens committee for transparency and accountability, summarized and other things.
So not actually spell it out.
Right, but then we would put it in board policy, what that committee was, how it was, just like we do with DAC, FAC, CAC. All of
do
the
you wanna
acts.
say a board appointed one, so that everybody knows what's gonna happen, the board is going to appoint them? Board appointed citizens committee, I do see that a lot.
Yeah,
Other
I like
schools
that.
take
I like
actions.
that.
Okay. Woo-hoo!
And then, I mean, we can talk about it in another meeting, but
Yeah.
in terms of having actual, I think some good robust criteria for what that looks like. And
Yeah.
what the community makeup should be and different.
And that would all be in the policy.
Yeah, all in our policy.
All right.
And then just general, and I don't think we're gonna solve it today, but just thinking also, what other sorts of language can we put in here to address these trust and accountability issues that's both meaningful but not overly restrictive on our ability to govern? That's a difficult balancing act, I know, but I think we need to do it. Can't get language.
We need more thought about ourselves.
Yeah.
Let's move to 5B. Take a quick read. Sorry guys, I know I'm pushing us, but we are trying to
Yeah, good time.
get done. Okay. To me, the big thing here, is the list.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly it talks about this one travels with inflation, consumer price index, revenue, which is a lot of words that sometimes I fear make voter eyes glaze over, but I think what they will go to, and Craig, correct me if I'm wrong, and Kim, is the list of things, right? That's what I would go to. I would look at the number and I would look at the list. You see head nod.
I have a question.
Yes.
So in this one, it says, such mill levy may be increased annually after the first full fiscal year for inflation, et cetera, This one is tied to inflation, but the other one is not.
Because the one above is total program. So total program by definition follows inflation. Brenna, stop me if I'm wrong. So because we say it's gonna maximize total program, it's gonna ebb and flow with inflation and funding count.
Okay, thank
This
you.
one is different, and so since it's not following total program, we have to clarify.
Understood, that
And
makes sense.
different statutory provisions too, which is part of that total. Yeah. Can't be helped.
So we're at the list.
We're at the last one.
There are 6 current bullet points. I would like to suggest or offer up a additional 7th that would start the list by saying maintaining safe, warm, and that just kind of overall speaks to what we are trying to do with our capital investment, revenue. So that that's the overall arching, and then the rest of the items underneath it give examples of what we're going to focus on.
My only question with that is hard to necessarily point to and say, see, we did it. Could it maybe not be a bullet point, but something in order to maintain safe, warm, and dry, or something like that?
I think it's also about modern spaces, learning spaces as well.
Okay.
The warm kind of runs against HVAC, right? So,
You're right, Colorado.
I mean,
climate change.
I'm worried about overall safe, warm, and dry also isn't attractive in a marketing sense. It's sort of like very, very boring.
Yeah. Capital.
So to call out the two that Jeff pointed to earlier, that was asbestos and clean water. Feels to me like those would be not aligned with what the actual work that needs to be done from an accountability standpoint. Later, I would want voters saying, what about these? Yeah.
So the recommendation would be to, those are kind of attributes of maintaining sewer systems and.
Yeah, but not calling those out specifically here and maybe substituting for, you know, and I'm also really interested in our consultants' recommendations about what is attractive to voters. But that aligns with our priorities.
Well, then I rescind the additional bullet point offer, and I will ask instead if there's a place where we can add it, just in the general, where it says for the following purposes, including in order to maintain modern and effective instructional spaces, and not have it in the bulleted list. I know it's boring. And I want to be really clear about what it is that we're trying to accomplish, and then the list is how we will accomplish it.
So you're proposing adding that and leaving the list there?
And leave the list.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I mean, one thing that I think we learned in 2024 and some past ballot measures is specificity is good. So I do like the concept of the list overall. I think, you know, what it actually says we can adjust if we want, but as specific as possible is what I would say. While leaving room for flexibility.
I think whatever language we have above that talks about the committee, it just matches, right? Like whatever we figure out for A would be the same.
Yeah.
And I think as a general sense, I'm not as worried about, obviously I think the below committee, or whatever, so whatever it is, language that's repeated. On this, in general, I'm not as worried about trust and accountability, because it's restricted to capital funds, but I do think it's really more a question of educating the need. You know, because this is where the just isn't understood. And well, you know, Craig did like the marketability of, you know, is there other language that is marketable that gets to that we can put in?
Yeah, I just put in the chat, just for comparison, Denver's 2020, which sought many of the similar things. But just as an example, providing cooling systems for high temperature classrooms is better than climate controlled HVAC. I think it's more understandable, it makes sense. Replacing leaking roofs is better than simply roofs.
Yeah, I like this.
So I think there's a few word changes that can improve and make really clear what you're doing. Because to me, like, a roof is like, I don't know, do you really need to do that? But replacing leaky roofs, which for the demonstration, the information we got earlier today, is absolutely true. I think it's just a little bit stronger language than what's currently written.
Craig, what
But then you're limited to,
Would it be helpful?
you are limited.
Craig, what was the ballot measure number for the one that you put in the chat? I just don't have access to the chat.
Oh, I just put a portion of Denver 4B
Okay.
from 2020.
Never mind, I've got it here, thank you.
it be helpful to add the actual consequences into the ballot language? For example, would it be helpful to add to mitigate school disruptions or school cancellations, and then go into provide climate-controlled spaces with effective and efficient HVAC systems? Does that make sense?
Yeah, but then again, I'm sorry, but then that's what you have to be doing. So you can't do it if it's not mitigating those things.
Right.
So I think you're kind of limiting by adding that language.
We're gonna add a quick note, if we add an umbrella, instructional spaces goal, we might struggle to defend investments in our athletic facilities, warehouses, water treatment plants, and other ground/parking lots.
Thank you.
Everyone see that?
So let me ask the board if it would be useful to take the history and the current greatest needs and the recommendations of language and what's appealing, and maybe bring a draft to the board
Yeah.
instead of wordsmithing.
I think that's good, and Jeff just reminded me that last one, like replacement of aging infrastructure and technology is an important catch-all to Brenna's point of like, there's things that aren't going to be instructional spaces.
Yeah.
And the CAC has shared that it's important to make sure we have some flexibility in this. So I like that idea, let's not wordsmith. I think there's a little bit of work to do here to clean up, but maybe that could be something that, we get with Craig and Kim and.
So we'll bring something, and what I'd ask is when you get these good ideas that you're throwing out, give them to us and make sure that we can capture them. And we'll also be accountable, they'll come back and tell you what suggestions you made and why or why not we put it in the draft, and you can revise that draft.
Can I ask a question if there's like any strategic value in terms of how the projects are listed, meaning like, does what's listed first versus last like influence voter perception?
Right now it's alphabetical, I noticed.
And should we be thinking about moving some of these bullets in a different order? I also think about voter fatigue, and some folks may not, like, they start to read something, and they're like, oh, okay, I got an idea, and then they stop reading.
I always believe in privacy and decency. First thing you read, the last thing you read.
Yeah.
So let's keep that in for the wordsmithing.
Yeah.
I wanna move us quickly. So if you have other thoughts on this, send them to our fearless leader here. And
Actually, send them to the Fearless Leaders Chief of Staff.
Okay, so.
And then he's gonna corral us to make sure that we do this as quickly as possible.
I don't read emails.
One last ask is just the adjustments we made to the yellow area in ballot as you may be repeated.
Got it.
Jeff, is the only way we're mitigating asbestos, or do we have things like lead in our schools?
You know, there are environmental things that happen in our schools that our environmental team, part of their just routine maintenance. But there isn't, a more robust plan that I feel like rises to the level of these other things that isn't just integrated into our daily operations.
Okay. I was just
So
wondering,
like,
if you
we'll
say
do
like
some radon
hazardous.
testing, some of those things.
Okay, yeah, like radon lead, like do you say
So-
hazardous or dangerous? I don't know, instead of just saying asbestos, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a matter of like, should it be called out as a specific thing that this, that these funds are gonna support? Cause it feels different around, some of the critical deferred needs that we have, rather than some of just the more routine environmental testing that we do.
Okay.
So,
So the question I wanna ask last, and Aaron and I were really trying to get us out early as just a model of like what an efficient meeting would be,
Yes.
because it's Friday. I've spoken with all of you, and I think we all understand the need, and I think we are all in a place of like feeling the impact of this. It sounds like there is consensus around this idea of like sharing the need. One thing that Matt really explained to me is like, we have to make sure we're telling people what we need. I'm really interested in if we are leaning towards one ballot initiative or two. Because when Craig has shared this, and when Brian has shared this, we haven't really gotten things going because we don't know what we're telling people we need yet, or what we're doing yet. And this is not a vote, this is not a decision-making. I am just curious as to how people are feeling, so that we can maybe give our experts and our staff direction.
One being 135 or 33, or one being just the 75 versus two.
Well, so maybe there's three options.
There's three options.
So there is one initiative that is 135 that has both. There is two initiatives. There is, I think it's pretty clear that just the capital is a no.
Right.
So then I think there is the third, and is it just the 75?
May I just interject a piece of information?
Absolutely.
I had my first meeting with Angie Anderson, who's the president of the JCEA, you all know that. And asked her, you know, what she's feeling, and I don't think she was necessarily speaking on behalf of the whole organization, but she expressed strong support for moving forward with both the compensation and the facilities aspects, and a willingness to work hard and support whichever structure, you know, we put together, and expressed enthusiasm for working with me and the rest of our team on this. So that's what they're leaning. What I heard from her is a strong appreciation, obviously, the compensation, and also the facilities needs, not just how it affects their working conditions, but how it affects our students. And I asked her permission to just say that, so I think I didn't know when, but how's it?
I know I'm leaning to, and I mean, I can't imagine a scenario where I would support just one for the full 133. I think it goes into the flames. And the situation, if nothing passes, I think is too dire to take the risk of losing it all. I have some concern, but I'd be interested in seeing what additional polling would say about how running two, how they affect each other. I'm not as concerned, and I feel somewhat reassured that asking for both, that the 60 is not necessarily gonna undercut the 75. I thought what you said when we had our one-on-one last week was very important, that if we don't ask for both, and only ask for the 75, and then we have all these capital issues, we're gonna create new trust issues, it's gonna make it hard to go back to the voters in 2 years. Initially, I was thinking we run the 75, work on some of these trust issues, go back to the 60, and I think that would probably not work. So that's my thought.
I think going back to what our partnerships mentioned to us, right, that we need everything. So I think running two initiatives makes sense based on the information we're receiving from the data, and it also informs our community that these are our needs. So it prepares them for future conversations that we might have. And I think we also need to be mindful and thoughtful about how we approach future conversations, talking about the simple fact that enrollment is declining, and as an organization, we're gonna need to address that and right-size that and make sure that our students are at the center of this. So viewing everything from an equity perspective, right? The student experience, learning opportunities, access to other opportunities as they go out there into the world. So even though we might get this influx of cash that we so desperately need, there's still gonna be future work that we still need to do. We need to prepare everyone. I would hate for the public to think we just need to get this money in and then everything will be fine. No, there's so much work to continue forward in.
Well, you both just made all of my arguments for me. Thank you. I agree. I think that our community deserves to have awareness of what our full needs are at this moment. So I think two ballot measures is the way to put it in front of them, because we are not putting in front of them an all or nothing decision. We are saying these are our needs. We're asking for them in two different methods, and we are relying on the community to let us know what they're willing to support and what they're not willing to support. Understanding the history of, you know, putting a mill and a bond out there usually turns into an either or scenario, especially given that it's gonna be a crowded ballot. But we've gotta be incredibly transparent with our community about what we need, and also not make decisions for them, that it's an all or nothing, or we're only going to put 75 out there in front of you because we've already decided we're not gonna ask you for everything that we need. voters to have the full, range of choice and the understanding of what our, district needs in order to move forward. And so I am strongly in support of putting two, ballot issue A, 5A and 5B on the ballot this November. It's strong.
My feelings are that the partnership did a lot of work. And they decided as a group to combine the two and present it as a combined package because they understood the capital needs and how rolling that in with our general fund needs is so important for the overall health and health of the district, for our students, for our staff. Looking at the options that Brenna shared, there would be I think it was a $4 million deficit if we went with the general fund versus an $18 million deficit if we went with 4B. But one thing that Matt mentioned was if we only pass that first one, the community is gonna expect that there will be no more reductions. That's not true. There will be more reductions, even if we pass just one or the other. And I think that's gonna lead to transparency issues and trust issues later on. So I feel that we need to combine them and be guided by what the recommendation of the partnership was.
I definitely hear that, and that's something that has come up quite a bit, the partnership. I do wanna say no one on the partnership were experts in polling, and they didn't have the polling data when they did make that recommendation. So my only caveat to that would be we now have polling data that might share a different story, which Craig, to your point earlier, I'm giving you the green light to go ahead and do that poll, because I think a poll specifically that says 1 or 2 would be really helpful in our decision making here. And I think no matter what we do, we go back to the partnership and we explain where we land, because it's important for them to understand. And I think they knew, and I think we told them in May that we plan to do polling that can sway some of the discussion. My biggest fear with 1 is that it brings down everything. That's my biggest fear. There's no doubt in my mind we need it. No doubt in my mind. Because of that, I think the conservative side of me leans towards 2, because I want at least 1 to get through. So I'm hopeful that Craig's poll, this one might show that people are actually supportive of it, but I'm really curious to see how that comes out. My conservative side leans towards 2.
And I'm curious if in the fall, we can have some study sessions and meetings to talk about what this picture might look like, depending on how folks, show up at the polls, in November. And just so we can bring everyone alongside us to understand why we need the capital stuff that we need, what's the benefit, or what it might look like if we vote for all 3 initiatives, if that's what ends up on the ballot, I don't know. And just also bringing in that layer of transparency of we're going to have to do more right sizing of our organization as as enrollment declines, right? Because there's no students that are coming into the district.
I also want to add, our partnership members invest a lot of time in showing up at meetings and seeing presentations, and just for them to arrive at the recommendation that we need to go after the full amount, I think really shows the efficacy of education and the role that plays with our voting public. Now, understanding how the public engages in elections also means that we have to get that education beyond just folks who are willing to show up at the partnership and out to our general community. And I think that with that level of education, an informed electorate would make the right decision for Jefferson County students. But I would,
polling in
Yes.
this one, are you polling, just just the whole, as the whole package? And then separately 5A and 5B, are you saying, do you prefer this over this? Or are you saying, if you had the choice between 5A and 5B, which one, like, would you select both, or would you select one or the other?
We would present it as they would see it, so we don't want to do a forced choice of this or this, but it's the 135 or the 75, then the 60, separately as two different mills to test the different levels of the two and see the impact of having both on the ballot separate from each other.
So one package versus A.
Right, but I'm curious if you did another question that would, you go into more detail on that, if they were gonna choose both 5A and 5B, or if they would choose just one or the other, so we know exactly, like, the thinking is that possibly 5A would pass and 5B would not, and I'm curious what the polling might say about that.
We could do that. Remember what I referenced earlier today is Ryan asked a pretty direct question on that in the first survey that showed overwhelmingly they chose teacher compensation over capital. But maybe after informing them or reading the ballot language, we can adjust that. We could certainly ask a question about that and see how that plays out.
Yeah, I'm curious at this point if it's changed. Thank you.
Alright guys, I'm gonna wrap this.
So I just wanna clarify, if we're gonna go and do another poll, it seems like we wanna refresh the language to the degree we can, but we won't have enough time to do the wordsmithing that I think we were talking about a minute ago. So maybe, Craig, do you feel, I don't know, maybe we can work sort of quickly with you to revise it to some degree, and that'll give us some insight that it won't be as perfect as ideal.
Yes, we've tracked the discussion today of the edits, and we have some other thoughts, and then I think we want to look at some of the components of the capital piece and look at how those could be improved. So we'll definitely shoot around some suggested language later today.
If it goes out early next week, and we have maybe another day or two, I don't think, we're not voting on this until the end of August, but we're getting close. So I think we can bring it up. Alright guys, thank you. Anything you wanna close us with? I think we've got some work ahead of us, but I think this is a really positive start.
I have one more question. Brenna, I have one more question for you. You said that we would be at the cap of our mill levy for the district. I was just curious, does the state ever increase that cap, or is that the cap like perpetually?
So interestingly enough, just so you guys are aware, if you pass this measure this year, and you might still have a couple years after, you setting that cap at 28% is a rare and uncommon opportunity to exceed what has otherwise been a 25% cap. So the answer to your question is yes, in very rare circumstances, the state changes the cap. It has been 25% for years and years. In this brief window of time, it can be higher than that for certain districts, ourselves included, that were hurt by the new school finance formula and shifting funds away from cost of living and some other things. And so this is our chance.
Thank you.
Alright guys, this brings us to the end of our agenda today. Thank you to everyone. A huge thank you to Craig for dialing in. I know you're out. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Brenna. We greatly appreciate your expertise and your time. Thank you, Lindsay. And thank you to all of our staff who've really put in a lot and means a lot to us. Our next scheduled meeting of the board is a study session on Tuesday, August 4th, where we will be holding a special public comment session related to the mill levy override, and with that, we stand adjourned. Sorry guys, I didn't actually work.
Yeah.
I'm trying really hard. Thanks. No, thanks guys, good job. Hi. Yeah,
I do remember, yeah. I feel I know.
Gentlemen, I showed up late today, and so I'm curious. I've not seen you at any of our meetings before, and I'm just wondering